The wind had a salt bite to it, a final cruelty from a winter that had already taken too much. It scoured the high plains of the Montana Territory, rattling the new panes in the Whitlow train depot and pushing drifts of gray snow against the north walls of every building. For Eli Hart, the wind was just another debt collector. It pried at the loose shingles of his house and whistled through the splintered ribs of the collapsed barn bay, a constant reminder of how close to the bone he was living. He stood with his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, the worn sheepskin collar turned high against his neck. The morning sun was a pale, useless coin in the vast sky. Before him, the wreckage of the North Bay was a testament to the blizzard's fury. Heavy timbers snapped like twigs lay tangled with roofing and shattered planks. A season's worth of hay was ruined, frozen into a solid block. 3 yearlings lay dead under the wreckage, a loss that cut deeper than the structure itself. It was 1883, and the new year had only brought new ways to fail. Eli was 32, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a stillness about him that men sometimes mistook for slowness. It wasn't. It was the patience of a man who had watched too many seasons turn. He was good with a horse and steady with a rifle, but he hated using either as weapons. This land, this piece of hard ground with its life-giving creek, was his inheritance, and the long winter had almost taken it back. He spent the morning dragging the dead yearlings clear, each pull another weight settling in his gut. The work was too much for one man. Tomas Ortega, his only hand, had a broken leg and couldn't help. Eli needed labor, which meant spending money he didn't have. He saddled his gray mare, her breath pluming white in the air, and rode 3 miles into Whitlow. The town was new and raw, clinging to the railroad tracks like a burr. The place smelled of coal, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of the nearby silver mine. Men in thick coats watched him pass, faces red and cracked from the cold. At the mercantile, Eli took a scrap of brown paper and a nub of charcoal. His handwriting was plain and firm. Help wanted, clearing barn collapse, day wages paid at sunset. He didn't sign his name. Everyone knew his place. He tacked the paper to the board outside, beside a wanted poster and an ad for patent medicine. He had just turned to leave when a woman's voice, quiet but certain, came from behind him. "Is the work still open?" He turned. The woman standing there wasn't one of Whitlow's familiar faces. She was maybe 27, strong-boned and serious, with eyes that held a guarded intelligence. Her hair, dark honey in color, was pulled tight under a gray wool shawl that was patched but spotless. Her coat was thin, her hands raw from the cold, yet she stood straight as a fence post. "It is," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "I can work," she said. "I can lift, and I can follow orders." There was no plea in her tone, only fact. He studied her a moment. He'd been expecting a broad-shouldered ranch hand or a down-on-his-luck miner, not a woman half frozen in threadbare clothes. "It's heavy work," he said slowly. "Hard labor." Quote, "I'm aware," she replied. The wind tugged at her shawl, showing a stubborn jawline set with quiet resolve. "My name is Mara Quinn," she added. "I can start now." Something in her tone, the unbending steadiness of it, decided him. He'd seen that look before in half-starved horses or wounded animals. They'd break before they'd bend. "Be at the Hart Ranch at sunrise," he said. "I'll have coffee on." She nodded once and he tipped his hat. When he rode away, her image stayed with him, a gray figure standing alone in the biting wind, refusing to be moved. The next morning, as the first light bled over the mountains, she was there. She had walked the 3 miles from town. She took the tin mug of coffee he handed her without a word of thanks, as if thanks were part of the payment, and drank it by the fire. When he offered her a pair of his old gloves, she examined them, then pulled them on. They were too large, but she flexed her fingers until they fit well enough. They worked in silence. He used the mare to drag the largest beams clear while she pried loose planks with a crowbar. She was stronger than she looked and wasted no motion. She didn't rest, didn't complain about the cold biting through her coat. Eli found himself watching her, the firm set of her shoulders, the rhythm of her work. At midday, he brought out a loaf of bread and a wedge of cheese. They sat on a dry patch of hay with their backs against the stable wall. "You're new to Whitlow," he said. She nodded, chewing slowly. "My husband worked the silver mine. A shaft collapsed last fall." He said nothing, but the picture was clear enough. This country gave little and took much. "I'm sorry," he said finally. She stared at the snowy peaks. "Don't be." The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable, like the solid ground beneath them. When the sun dipped low, she set down her tools. "The day is done," she said. "There's still light," he replied. "I'm paid for the day. I'll be back at sunrise." She took off the gloves and set them neatly on a fence post. He counted out her wages, coins he could barely spare. She took them without hesitation, tucking them into an inner pocket sewn into her coat. Then he noticed her gathering the leftover crusts of bread and cheese, wrapping them carefully in a small cloth. She turned to leave, walking back toward the darkening horizon. And as he watched that small gray figure disappear into the twilight, something in Eli Hart's chest shifted. He didn't know it yet, but the woman who had come to clear the ruins of his barn would soon clear the ruins of his life as well. The pattern held for a week. Each morning, Mara Quinn arrived with the sunrise, worked without complaint, and left as dusk gathered. She spoke only when needed, her voice even and measured. Through quiet questions, Eli learned that she had 3 children: Connor, 10, Willa, 8, and little May, just 3. He learned this not because she offered it, but because her silences left space for truth to slip through. Every day she collected the scraps of their lunch, crusts of bread, ends of bacon, leftover cheese, wrapping them in a square of cloth with reverent care. She never hid it, but she never explained either. Eli said nothing. He only made sure there was always a bit more food left over than the day before. By the 5th morning, the sun broke through a rare patch of clear sky, and the snow crusted hard beneath their boots. Eli was starting to believe winter might loosen its grip when 2 riders appeared on the ridge. One dressed too fine for work, the other hard and silent. Silas Rook, the railroad's land agent. His coat was clean, his boots polished, and his smile had the polished sheen of a man who never worked for his living. His companion handled the surveying gear with military precision, pounding stakes into the frozen earth as if claiming the ground by force of habit. "Morning, Hart," Rook called, dismounting. "Just making some preliminary surveys for the railroad's water access plan." "The railroad has no water access on this land," Eli said flatly. "That creek runs through my deed." Rook smiled thinly. "Deeds are complicated. Taxes even more so. We've been reviewing the county ledgers, and it seems your water rights taxes haven't been paid in some time." "There's no such thing as a water rights tax," Eli said. "There is now," Rook replied. "Progress changes laws, my friend. We'll make you a fair offer for the property, of course." "You're not driving stakes on my land," Eli said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. Rook's smile sharpened. "Consider this a courtesy visit." He swung onto his horse and gestured toward his man. "Leave the stakes." They rode away, leaving behind the red-tipped markers glinting like drops of blood on the snow. Eli stood there a long while, jaw clenched, until Mara's voice broke the silence. "He'll come back." "I know," he said. That evening, Eli went into town for supplies. The whispers met him before the door closed behind him. "The Quinn widows working out at the Hart place," someone said near the stove. "3 little ones, I heard. Alone with a man like him? Ain't proper." "Man gets lonely," another voice chuckled. Eli didn't turn, didn't answer, but every careless word was a spark in dry tinder. He saw Sheriff Hobbs outside the saloon, talking with Silas Rook. When Hobbs caught Eli's eye, the lawman looked away. Only Dr. Ada Pike, the town's old physician, met his gaze with a small, sharp nod, quiet solidarity in a world of cowards. That night, as the cold deepened, Eli stood by the red survey stake near his well. The moonlight gleamed on its painted tip. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled it from the frozen ground and snapped it clean over his knee. The crack echoed across the valley like a small act of defiance. But his thoughts weren't on Rook. They were on Mara. Her routine, her silence, the way she always left, just as the sun touched the peaks. All of it gnawed at him. She walked toward town, but too early for night and too late for safety. One evening, curiosity and unease drove him to follow her trail from a distance. He rode up to the ridge, keeping to the trees. From there, the road to Whitlow was plain, but she wasn't on it. Instead, he saw her small figure turning east, toward the dense stand of pines that bordered his land. He dismounted, tied his mare, and followed on foot. Her tracks led through the snow and into the shadows until he came upon a clearing. An old line rider's cabin stood there, sagging roof, crooked chimney, barely a shelter at all. A faint orange light flickered from the window. Eli crept closer, guilt pressing on him like a hand to the chest. Through a crack in the chinking, he saw her. Mara knelt beside a small fire built from scavenged wood. Around her were 3 children, thin, clean, and heartbreakingly patient. The boy whittled a stick with concentration. The older girl held the youngest close beneath a ragged blanket. They weren't playing. They were waiting. Mara unwrapped her small cloth bundle, dividing the bread and bacon into 4 equal parts. The 3 children ate fast, silently, their hunger too deep for words. She didn't eat until they were done. Eli stepped back from the cabin, throat tight. He had seen poverty before, but this was pride surviving on crumbs. He rode home without a sound. The next morning, when she arrived at the ranch, he said nothing of what he'd seen. But before their midday meal, he went into the house and returned with a heavy canvas sack. "Found some extra supplies I don't have room for," he said, keeping his tone even. "Flour, salt pork, soap, some coffee. There's a pair of smaller gloves, too." She froze, eyes fixed on the sack. Then, after a long silence, she walked over, opened it, and stared inside. Her face didn't soften, but something flickered there, a quiet calculation between gratitude and pride. When she came for her wages that evening, she looked him straight in the eye. "Thank you for the gloves," she said simply. The next morning, the sack was gone. In its place on the fence post was a folded scrap of paper, weighted with a stone. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Please do not do this again. I work to live." Eli read the words twice. It wasn't ingratitude, it was dignity. A line drawn clean in the dust. He folded the note and tucked it into his pocket. After that, he stopped leaving food. Instead, he made sure their shared lunches were warm and filling, thick stew, roasted meat, hot biscuits. He watched her eat a full meal for the first time since she'd arrived. And then he began rebuilding the old barn bay, not for the cattle, but for something else he couldn't yet name. He told himself it was just work. But as he saw her hands raw from labor and her eyes soften briefly when the children came up the path one afternoon to bring her a shawl, he knew better. He was building a shelter, not just from the wind, but from the world itself. Yet Whitlow's gossip grew like weeds. Men whispered in the saloon, women muttered at the church. And when Sheriff Hobbs rode out one afternoon, sweating even in the cold, Eli knew who had sent him. "Just a friendly visit," Hobbs said, avoiding his eyes. "People are talking. A woman alone at your ranch. Well, it doesn't look right. And Silas Rook's concerned about vagrants on railroad land." Eli set down the rope he was coiling. "She's not a vagrant. She's a worker, paid honest wages. That's the law, isn't it?" Quote. Hobbs stammered. Of course. Just saying, best not get involved. Could lead to trouble. The only trouble here is a man from the railroad trying to steal my water and using you to deliver his message," Eli said coldly. The sheriff flushed, mumbled something about duty, and rode off, hat low. When the dust settled, Eli looked toward the barn, where Mara was stacking wood, the faintest trace of frost shimmering on her hair. She was fighting to survive. And now, so was he. That night, as the cold crept in, Eli struck a match to the lantern and worked late into the dark, finishing the new bay with his own hands. He wasn't sure what he was building anymore, a wall, a refuge, or a beginning. But he knew this much. The woman who had walked into his ruin was rebuilding something inside him too. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The storm broke with the fury of a cornered animal. Rain and sleet battered the valley, slamming against Eli Hart's small ranch like a punishment. The wind howled through the chimneys, shaking the rafters, but Eli's thoughts weren't on his house. They were on the family huddled in his barn. Mara and her 3 children were safe there, he told himself. The new roof held. The stove burned steady. Still, the unease twisting in his gut wouldn't rest. Then, a flicker of light outside caught his eye. Not lightning, but fire. Through the curtain of rain, he saw an orange glow pulsing on the horizon. His heart dropped. It was coming from the direction of the old line rider's cabin. He didn't hesitate. Snatching his coat and lantern, he charged into the storm. The rain turned the ground to sludge, the wind ripping at him with icy claws. He ran until he burst into the clearing and froze. The cabin was engulfed, flames roaring higher than the trees. "Mara!" he shouted. A thin cry answered, not from the flames, but from the creekside rocks. There she was, trying to shield her 3 children beneath her soaked shawl. The fire's reflection turned her face to something both fierce and broken. He waded through the mud, grabbed the youngest child, May, and tucked her under his coat. "Connor, Willa, stay close," he barked. They followed, stumbling after him as he half led, half carried them toward the ranch. Mara stumbled beside him, her eyes fixed on the burning ruin that had been their home. By the time they reached his house, all of them were drenched and shaking. He hauled them inside, slamming the door against the storm's roar. The fire in the hearth blazed bright. He stripped off his coat, set the shivering children near the warmth, and brought blankets from the back room. "Get those wet clothes off," he said gruffly, turning away to give her privacy. His hands trembled as he fed the flames, but his voice stayed steady. "You're safe now." The children soon slept, wrapped in warmth. Mara sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "It was no accident," Eli said quietly, watching her. "That fire? It was Rook, or the gunman he hired." She said nothing, just gripped the mug of warm milk he'd given her. But he saw the tremor in her hands, the silent fear she refused to show. Morning came, cold and bright. The world outside looked washed clean, but the footprints in the mud near the barn told another story. A man's boots with star-shaped imprints on the heel. Wade. Scrawled across the barn door in white chalk were 2 words. "You're next." Eli stared at them, a storm of his own building behind his calm eyes. He saddled his horse, ignoring Mara's question as she followed him to the porch. "Where are you going?" she asked, voice rough with exhaustion. He pulled the reins tight. "To see a man about a debt." He rode straight to town, not to the sheriff who had already proven useless, but to Silas Rook's office. The railroad agent looked up from his desk, all smug composure and false charm. "Mr. Hart," Rook said smoothly, "I assume this is about my offer." Eli slammed his hands on the desk, the sound cracking like a whip. "It's about the fire and your man, Wade." Rook's expression barely twitched. "You have no proof." "Don't need it," Eli said, voice cold. "Everyone in town knows what you've been doing. You think you can take my water, my land? Not while I'm still breathing." Before Rook could reply, the door swung open. Dr. Ada Pike stepped in, followed by Reverend Reeves. "We heard there was some business here," Ada said sharply. "As members of the town council, we thought it best to witness." Rook's smirk faltered. "Silas," Ada continued, "we reviewed the county's ledgers this morning. There is no such thing as a water rights tax. You invented it." Reverend Reeves nodded solemnly. "And bribery, as I understand it, is still a sin in Montana territory." Rook's face darkened. "This is slander." "No," Ada said. "It's the truth." Eli didn't need to say another word. He turned and walked out, leaving the railroad man sputtering behind him. But when he returned to the ranch, his heart sank. A small bundle sat on the porch. A few blankets, a child's toy, a woman's shawl. Mara was standing nearby, her shoulders slumped. "I can't stay," she said, voice shaking. "I've brought you nothing but trouble. I won't let my children cost you your home." He stepped down from his horse and walked toward her until they stood face to face. "You're not leaving," he said, quiet but unyielding. "This is your home now. You and your children belong here." Tears welled in her eyes. He saw the exhaustion, the pride, the years of fighting the world alone. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to run anymore." That night, Dr. Ada Pike visited, checking the children and staying for supper. She told Eli and Mara everything she knew about Wade, the gunman who'd done Rook's dirty work for years. "This isn't just your fight," she warned. "It's how the railroad does business, but people are finally ready to stand with you." And they did. When Rook returned days later with Wade and 6 hired men, they found Eli ready. Tomas Ortega, limping but resolute, stood beside him, gripping a pitchfork. Dr. Pike and 2 neighboring ranchers, Peterson and Calloway, stood nearby. The whole town had gathered along the ridge, watching. Rook waved a court paper like a weapon. "By order of the district court, I'm seizing this creek for the railroad," he shouted. Ada called back, "That order's based on a lie, Silas." "Wade, get the pipe across," Rook barked. The hired men hesitated. The bridge over the swollen creek trembled under the surge of melted snow. The water raged, brown and wild. Eli stepped forward. "That's far enough," he said evenly. Wade sneered, walking toward him, his hand hovering near his gun. The crowd went silent. Mara stood on the porch, her children clutching her dress. The gunman's voice carried over the water. "Last man who stood in my way is buried on the prairie." Before anyone could move, a sudden roar filled the air. The bridge's supports gave way under the weight of the rushing creek. Wade stumbled, his foot slipped, and his gun fired. The bullet missed Eli and splintered the porch railing near Mara. Screams rose from the crowd. Eli dove forward, grabbing Wade's wrist as the bridge lurched. They crashed into the water together, the gun spinning away into the current. The freezing torrent dragged them under, but Eli fought to the surface, clutching a wooden beam. Downstream, Wade clawed for the far bank, coughing and cursing. Rook, furious and half-mad, waded into the shallows, trying to drive a red stake into the mud. "This land is mine," he shouted, as if the river could hear him. A massive log, swept loose by the flood, slammed into the bank, tearing it apart. Rook lost his footing and vanished into the churning water. When the current calmed, the red-tipped stakes were gone, washed away like his lies. Eli dragged himself ashore, soaked and shaking. Mara ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. She pressed her forehead to his, tears mixing with rain. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're safe." Behind them, Sheriff Hobbs finally found his courage. He drew his pistol, not at Eli, but at Rook's remaining men. "I'm arresting you," he said firmly, "for arson, bribery, and attempted murder." No one argued. Weeks passed. The railroad backed down. Hobbs resigned, and Tomas was sworn in as the new deputy. The town changed. Not in an instant, but like spring thawing the hard ground. They built a schoolhouse raised by the same hands that had once turned away. Mara became the heart of the effort, cooking for the builders in the outdoor kitchen Eli had built for her. And Eli, quiet, steady Eli, rebuilt the bridge over the creek. When it was done, he nailed a simple sign to its post. Public water access. All neighbors welcome. That night, after the children were asleep, he sat on the porch, carving a wooden hawk. Mara joined him in the moonlight. For a while, they said nothing. The air smelled of pine and clean earth. "I worry," Eli said softly, "that you stay because you feel you owe me." Mara looked at him, her face calm and sure. "And I worry you think we've taken your freedom." He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing hers. "Before you came, the This was just a house, not a home. My freedom means nothing if I'm alone. Tears filled her eyes, glimmering in the moonlight. I'm here because I want to be, she said. Because with you, I feel safe. I feel seen. Quote. Later, she went outside to hang a damp blanket to dry. The moon poured silver light over her. For a moment, she stood still, breathing deep. Then she let the blanket fall, shoulders bare to the cold air. Not as an invitation, but as release. I knew you were there, she whispered when he stepped onto the porch. Please don't go. He hesitated, every instinct telling him to look away, but her voice broke something open in him. I'm so tired, she said, her voice trembling. Tired of being strong, tired of hiding. He walked closer, his heart pounding. The moonlight painted her skin in silver and shadow, fragile and defiant all at once. Sweet mercy, he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. You'll ruin me. He reached down, picked up the fallen blanket, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he drew her into his arms, holding her close, her head resting against his chest. He wasn't covering her to hide her. He was covering her to keep her warm. To tell her, without words, that she never had to face another night alone. The wind whispered through the barley field. The moon watched in silence, and in that moment, beneath its cold, perfect light, two broken souls found their home, not in walls or land, but in each other.